The lights of the Las Vegas Convention Center gleamed off the polished wooden mat. Cameras flashed, fans shouted, and the air buzzed with excitement. This wasn't just another martial arts exhibition. It was a gathering of legends. And among them stood two names that defined generations of action heroes, Steven Seagal and Chuck Norris. Steven walked across the mat with his usual swagger, calm, confident, and just a little too proud. He adjusted his black gi, gave a smug smile, and glanced toward Chuck, who was speaking softly with a group of young martial artists. Chuck looked relaxed, dressed in a simple white karate uniform. No arrogance, no showmanship, just quiet respect. But then Steven chuckled loudly, loud enough for the microphones to catch. "You know," he said with a smirk, "that old-school karate stuff is cute. But it wouldn't last a second in a real fight today." The audience reacted instantly. Laughter from some, gasps from others. Chuck slowly turned his head toward Steven, expression calm and unreadable. No anger, no reaction, just that legendary, unshakable calm. A host tried to lighten the mood. "Well, gentlemen, maybe we'll get a little friendly demonstration later?" Steven shrugged. "Sure, I'll show the crowd what real martial arts look like." Chuck just smiled. "Every art is real, and if you respect it," the crowd murmured. They could feel the tension growing. Steven laughed again, waving dismissively. "Respect? Come on, Chuck, you're a legend, I'll give you that. But those moves belong in a museum." That's when Chuck stepped forward, slowly tightening the belt around his waist. His voice was soft but steady. "Sometimes, Steven, what's in the museum still works," the audience roared. Phones came out, recording every second. Even the announcer looked nervous. Nobody expected the friendly exhibition to turn into a silent showdown of egos. And then the camera zoomed in on Chuck's eyes. Calm, focused, and unblinking. But what happened when Chuck finally stepped on the mat left everyone in that arena speechless. The crowd's cheers slowly faded as Chuck and Steven moved to opposite ends of the mat. What had started as a friendly showcase now felt like a quiet storm waiting to break. Cameras rolled, flashes burst. Every eye in the arena fixed on these two legends. Steven Seagal began pacing, rolling his shoulders with that signature confidence that had made him famous in Hollywood. He smirked, cracked his knuckles, and looked over at Chuck Norris, who was kneeling in silent meditation. "Still doing that old breathing thing?" Steven laughed. "You really think calmness wins fights?" Chuck opened his eyes unbothered. "Calmness doesn't win fights," he replied softly. "It prevents them." A few fans in the front row clapped at that, a line that hit deeper than anyone expected. Steven, however, wasn't impressed. He mimicked Chuck's bow in an exaggerated, mocking way. "Oh, come on, Chuck. The world has moved on. Real fighters, real warriors. Don't waste time with tradition." The host tried to intervene again, nervously chuckling. All right. Maybe let's save the fire for the demonstration, gentlemen." But Steven kept going. "No disrespect," he said, though his tone carried plenty of it. "But I think the world's ready to see what modern martial arts can do. No point in living in the past." Chuck simply smiled, that calm, steady look that never broke character. He walked slowly toward the center of the mat, each step deliberate and balanced. His movements weren't flashy, but they carried a quiet authority, the kind that didn't need proving. The crowd noticed it. People started whispering, "Look how he moves. He's still got that precision. He's in total control." Meanwhile, Steven raised his arms, showing off a series of flowing Aikido movements, spinning and flicking his hands with dramatic flair. Cameras followed his every move, his black gi rippling as he made a show of power. The crowd applauded, not because they admired him, but because they sensed something was coming. He finished with a grin, pointing toward Chuck. "See that? That's speed, control, and power. You can't get that from old-school karate." Chuck gave a polite nod. "Maybe not. But power isn't just in speed, Steven. It's in timing and patience." For the first time, Steven's smirk faltered slightly. There was something about Chuck's tone. Not anger, not pride, just certainty. The announcer stepped forward, sensing the perfect cue. "Ladies and gentlemen, are you ready for a little friendly exhibition between two of the greatest martial artists of all time?" The audience erupted in cheers. People stood, phones out, ready to record a piece of history. You could feel the electricity in the air, that rare energy before something unforgettable happens. Steven stepped closer, whispering so only Chuck could hear. You sure you're up for this, old man? I don't want to hurt a legend. Chuck chuckled quietly. You won't. That was all he said. And somehow those two words carried more weight than any insult Steven had thrown all evening. They took their positions. The referee raised his hand, signaling the start. The crowd fell into silence. For a few moments, neither man moved. Steven stood tall, hands loose, eyes locked. Chuck, on the other hand, lowered his stance slightly, grounded, balanced, breathing steady. The tension was unbearable. You could almost hear the pulse of the audience sinking with the slow rhythm of Chuck's breath. The camera panned across the crowd, everyone frozen, watching two different worlds collide, ego and experience, arrogance and humility. Then the narrator's voice broke the silence. Before the first move is even made, tell us in the comments, where are you watching this story from? Which country or city are you in right now? Because what happens next will be remembered around the world. A murmur of excitement spread through the arena. Even viewers online watching live streams began flooding chat rooms. I'm watching from Brazil. Greetings from the Philippines. Chuck will always be the master. Back on the mat, Steven tilted his head, rolling his neck as if bored. Anytime you're ready, cowboy. Chuck raised his eyes. Calm, focused, always ready. The crowd's cheers began to rise again, echoing through the hall. The air grew thick with adrenaline. You could see it in every camera angle. Two icons facing each other not as movie stars, but as martial artists. This wasn't about fame anymore. It was about legacy. Steven cracked a half smile. You really think those old karate tricks still work? Chuck's reply was almost a whisper. Why don't you come find out? The crowd screamed. Flashbulbs exploded. The tension was unbearable. Steven Seagal laughed one last time. But when Chuck finally moved, every jaw in the arena dropped. The entire arena seemed to hold its breath. The lights dimmed just enough for the mat to glow beneath them. The two men, Steven Seagal and Chuck Norris, stood only a few feet apart, motionless. Cameras zoomed in, commentators whispered, and everyone could feel that something unforgettable was about to happen. Chuck's breathing was steady. His hands hung loose, his eyes locked gently on Steven's chest. Not his face, not his movements, but his center. Years of discipline and awareness radiated through him. Every muscle relaxed, every thought silent. Steven, on the other hand, stood tall, his signature smirk stretching across his face. He brushed a strand of hair back and said under his breath, Let's make this quick, cowboy. Chuck didn't reply. He simply bowed, a gesture of respect, the kind martial artists give before a true test. Steven hesitated a second, then gave a careless half-bow in return, rolling his eyes as he straightened up. The referee looked at both men, gave a quick signal, and then stepped aside. The match, or at least what everyone thought would be a light sparring demonstration, had begun. For a few seconds, nothing happened. No one moved. You could hear the faint hum of the arena lights, the clicking of camera shutters, even the nervous breathing of fans in the front row. Then, Steven took the first step, a slow, wide movement forward. His feet glided across the mat, his hands floating in front of him like a predator testing its prey. Chuck didn't move. His eyes followed Steven's every motion, his stance low, balanced, grounded. Steven gave a playful grin. Come on, legend. Show us what those museum moves look like. Still nothing. Chuck remained as still as stone. The tension was unbearable. The crowd didn't cheer, they whispered. The energy was no longer entertainment. It was respect mixed with uncertainty. Even those who admired Seagal's confidence began to sense that something deeper was unfolding. Steven made another move, a faint jab toward Chuck's shoulder. Not a real strike, but a test. Chuck didn't blink. The jab stopped just inches away and Steven laughed softly. See? Too slow. Chuck tilted his head slightly. Speed means nothing if it's wasted. The crowd reacted with a quiet ooh. You could see even Steven's grin tighten a little. He backed up a step, rotating his wrists, loosening his shoulders again. You really want to do this? He asked, voice full of confidence but eyes starting to search for a reaction. Chuck didn't give one. Another few moments passed, and then Steven snapped, launching a quick demonstration kick more for show than contact. Chuck easily sidestepped, fluid as water. Steven tried again, a fake chop. Chuck blocked it with one subtle movement, perfectly timed, perfectly calm. The crowd began to cheer louder now, sensing Chuck's quiet control. Steven Steven stepped back, raising his arms dramatically. All right, he said to the audience. I'll stop playing nice. Chuck straightened his posture slightly, eyes steady. So far, you've been playing alone. The arena exploded with laughter and applause. Even the commentators chuckled. Chuck hadn't even thrown a punch yet, but he was already winning the mental fight. Steven's smile faltered. He tightened his stance, seriousness creeping into his face for the first time that night. He circled slowly, studying Chuck now, trying to find an opening. The crowd went quiet again, watching, waiting, recording. The camera panned across the faces of fans, some excited, some anxious. Everyone could feel the energy building, like the moment before a lightning strike, and that's when the narrator's voice cut in softly. If you were in Chuck's place right now, would you stay calm or hit back after all that mockery? Tell me in the comments below, because what happens next will show why patience is a warrior's greatest weapon. That question hit viewers hard. People online started typing instantly, debating who was right, the calm master or the bold challenger. Back in the arena, Steven threw a sudden sharp jab, faster this time. Chuck blocked it effortlessly with a small twist of his wrist. Steven followed with a low kick. Chuck stepped aside like he'd seen it coming 10 seconds earlier. Now Steven looked genuinely irritated. You just gonna keep dodging me? He muttered. Chuck's voice was quiet but firm. I'm just letting you finish showing off. Laughter erupted again. Even the referee tried to hide a smile. Steven clenched his jaw, dropped his shoulders slightly, and exhaled. This wasn't the light-hearted exhibition he expected. He wanted to win. He wanted the world to see him as the superior martial artist, and that ego was starting to blind him. Chuck, meanwhile, looked the same as he did 10 minutes ago. Calm, balanced, patient. They reset their stances once more. Two legends, two worlds. One message waiting to be taught. The arena lights glared off the mat, turning the space into a stage of silence and anticipation. You could almost hear hearts beating in rhythm. Even the cameras zoomed in close, faces intense, breath slow, eyes unblinking. Then the narrator whispered the final line of the segment. Steven Seagal was about to learn that mocking a master is the quickest way to meet one. The camera froze on Chuck's face, still, unreadable, legendary, and then cut to black. The crowd was restless now, half excited, half uneasy. Steven Seagal, the man who had spent his life boasting about being untouchable, was starting to sweat. The camera zoomed in on his face. His jaw was tight, his nostrils flaring slightly. Chuck Norris, meanwhile, stood calmly in his stance, relaxed, collected, completely unreadable. The energy between them had shifted. It was no longer a playful exhibition. It was pride versus patience. The referee gave a small nod to resume. Steven adjusted his stance, pacing side to side like a panther trying to corner its prey. Chuck followed each movement with the smallest turns of his head, conserving every ounce of motion. Steven smirked again. You sure you're ready for this, old man? Chuck smiled faintly. Always ready. And then Steven lunged. A rapid front kick flew toward Chuck's midsection. In an instant, Chuck stepped aside, catching Steven's leg with a subtle twist and letting his own momentum spin him off balance. Steven stumbled slightly but caught himself, his ego forcing a grin. The audience gasped. The commentators murmured. Chuck's movement had been so effortless, it looked like time slowed around him. Steven straightened, brushing his guy, pretending it was all part of the act. Nice reflexes, he muttered. Chuck replied quietly. Reflexes don't win fights, respect does. That line landed like a punch. The crowd went silent again. You could feel the tension. This wasn't just a contest of martial arts anymore. It was a lesson in humility. Steven charged again, throwing a combination. A jab, a back fist, a side kick. Each move looked powerful, sharp, but none of them landed. Chuck's body moved like water, flowing around every attack. His eyes never left Steven's chest, reading him like an open book. Finally, Steven stopped, breathing hard. He stared at Chuck, frustrated. Stop dodging me and fight back. Chuck lowered his hand slightly. You're not fighting me, Steven. You're fighting your own pride. The audience erupted in applause. Even those who once cheered for Seagal started to sense the truth behind Chuck's words. Steven's ego, however, wouldn't back down. He tightened his stance again. Let's see if your philosophy blocks this. He threw another fast strike and a spinning back kick. But Chuck barely moved. His foot slid half an inch, his hand raised just enough, tap, and Steven's leg met air. Chuck finally took one small step forward, his presence suddenly commanding. His calm energy filled the space, and even Steven hesitated, realizing for the first time he was standing in front of someone who had mastered not just combat, but himself. The crowd began to chant softly, "Chuck! Chuck! Chuck!" But Chuck raised a hand, silencing them with just one gesture. He looked Steven in the eye and said, "A real fighter doesn't need to prove who he is. His actions do that for him." Steven didn't respond. His face was red, not from exhaustion, but from embarrassment. He wasn't used to being humbled, especially not in front of a live crowd. He forced a laugh. "You're good with words, cowboy. But this isn't a philosophy class." Chuck nodded, then stopped talking. A low murmur rolled through the audience. They could feel the shift coming. Steven's smirk faded completely now. He clenched his fists and moved in fast, and a real strike this time, aimed directly at Chuck's face. Chuck leaned just enough to let the punch brush past his ear. The air whistled from the force. Before Steven could recover, Chuck tapped him lightly on the shoulder, just a reminder that he could have hit him if he wanted to. The crowd roared. Cameras flashed. Commentators were shouting over each other. Steven spun around, glaring, humiliated. "Don't toy with me." Chuck's tone was steady as stone. "Then don't give me toys to play with." Even the referee looked impressed. He'd seen countless exhibitions, but never one with such psychological control. Now Steven's movements became reckless. He attacked with anger, throwing wide, fast strikes. All strength, no strategy. Chuck kept dodging with minimal effort, letting Seagal burn himself out. Each failed strike drew louder gasps from the audience. Finally, Steven swung one last wild hook, and Chuck caught his wrist mid-air. The arena froze. Chuck didn't twist, didn't hit, didn't counterattack. He just held Steven's hand firmly, looked him in the eyes, and said, "This isn't about who's stronger. It's about who's wiser." That line echoed through the speakers. The crowd fell into stunned silence, and it wasn't a fight anymore, it was a moment of truth. Steven pulled his hand free, stepping back. You could see doubt flicker in his eyes. For the first time, he seemed unsure. Chuck turned slightly toward the audience, still composed. The camera zoomed in as he said quietly, "Power is easy to gain, control. That takes a lifetime." The crowd erupted again, cheering wildly. Even those who came to see Seagal win were clapping now, not for defeat, but for mastery. The narrator's voice entered. The crowd didn't realize it yet, but the real fight hadn't even begun. The next few seconds would leave the world in disbelief. The camera slowly panned across Chuck's calm face and Steven's frustrated glare. The hum of the lights grew louder. The arena lights dimmed again, centering the spotlight on both men, the quiet master and the loud challenger. And as the frame closed in, Chuck's voice could be heard one last time before the cut. "You can laugh at skill, but you can't laugh at truth." Cut to black. The tension in the arena could cut through steel. The lights dimmed slightly, leaving only the mat illuminated, two silhouettes standing face to face. Two legends breathing in silence. Steven Seagal's face was no longer smug. It was serious, sharp, and tense. Sweat rolled down his forehead. His earlier grin had vanished, replaced with the look of a man who couldn't believe what was happening. Chuck Norris, calm as a mountain, stood in the same balanced stance he'd held since the beginning. His breathing was even, his eyes soft but focused. He wasn't looking to humiliate anyone, but if the lesson had to be taught through a punch, he was ready. The referee took a cautious step back. Everyone in the audience, thousands of people, leaned forward at once. You could hear cameras clicking, fans whispering, and the faint hum of air conditioning filling the quiet. Steven's voice broke the silence. "All right, legend. No more games." Chuck didn't answer. Steven tightened his black belt, adjusted his GI, and raised his hands. This time there was no showmanship, no laughter, only raw frustration. He stepped forward and snapped a jab. Fast, precise, but Chuck slipped it like it was nothing. Another jab. Dodged again. Steven growled under his breath and launched a spinning kick. Chuck stepped back, allowing the heel to miss by an inch. The crowd gasped. Every move Steven made was met with grace and stillness. and that made him furious. Steven charged in again, trying to grab Chuck by the arm, but Chuck countered with a simple wrist lock that made Steven stumble sideways. Instead of striking, Chuck let go instantly. He didn't want to hurt him, only guide him. But Steven's pride couldn't handle that. He straightened, his eyes blazing. "Stop dodging me." Chuck's voice was calm. "Stop trying to fight who you don't understand," the audience murmured. They could feel the temperature rise between the two. Steven suddenly roared and threw a full-force strike, and on a wild hook aimed straight at Chuck's jaw. It was powerful enough to knock most men out cold. Chuck moved a single step sideways. Time seemed to slow. His hand rose, his body turned slightly, and then it happened. The punch, a short, controlled counter. Bam! A lightning-fast strike to Steven's chest, perfectly timed, perfectly placed. The sound echoed through the entire arena. Steven's body jerked backward, his breath caught in his lungs, and his feet stumbled 2 steps before he dropped to one knee. The crowd gasped, not because Chuck hit him hard, but because of how effortlessly he did it. One strike, one motion, no anger, no hesitation, just precision born from decades of mastery. For a second there was silence. Even the cameras froze. Then the arena erupted. "Oh my God! Did you see that? He didn't even move!" Commentators shouted over each other. People in the front rows stood on their seats, and the moment replayed instantly on the giant screens above the mat. Slow-motion footage showing the clean, disciplined counterpunch. Steven sat on the mat, stunned. His pride had taken a harder hit than his body. He wasn't injured, but the message had landed deeper than any bruise ever could. Chuck took a small step forward, offering his hand. "It's not about who's stronger, Steven. It's about who's centered." Steven stared at that hand for a long second. Then slowly he took it. Chuck helped him to his feet, the crowd realizing what they were witnessing, not a fight, but a lesson in humility, erupted in applause. Steven looked at Chuck, his face red but his eyes finally softening. "I guess I needed that." Chuck smiled. "We all do. Sometimes." The audience cheered louder. Cameras zoomed in on the handshake, capturing the respect that had replaced ego. For a moment, 2 legends stood together, not as rivals, but as martial artists united by discipline and honor. Then Chuck turned toward the crowd, bowed slightly, and walked back toward his corner. The applause followed him like thunder. Steven watched him go. The man he had mocked minutes ago was now the man who just gave him a life lesson in front of the world. He exhaled deeply, then smiled. "Guess the cowboy still kicks harder than I thought." The crowd laughed and clapped again. The tension had broken, replaced by admiration. As the commentators spoke, the narrator's voice faded in. It wasn't about who could hit harder. It was about who understood balance, humility, and control. Steven Seagal laughed at Chuck Norris's karate, until the first punch reminded him why true mastery doesn't shout. It whispers. The video replayed the moment once more. Chuck's movement in slow motion, his calm expression, the clean impact, and the silent respect that followed. In the comment section, viewers were already going wild. That punch wasn't power, and it was wisdom. Chuck's calmness before the hit, legendary. Respect to both men. This is what real martial arts looks like. The screen faded to black, and the final line echoed softly. Never mistake silence for weakness. Because when a true master speaks, even a single punch can teach a lifetime of lessons. For a few long seconds, the arena was frozen in disbelief. The sound of that single punch still echoed in the air. A sound that didn't just hit Steven Seagal's chest, but the pride of arrogance itself. Chuck Norris stood quietly in the center of the mat, breathing evenly. His face showed no victory, no arrogance, only the calm of a man who understood what had just happened. Steven, still on one knee, took a deep breath and looked up. The shock had faded, replaced by realization. He wasn't humiliated, he was humbled. Slowly he stood up, dusted off his GI, and turned toward Chuck. The crowd waited for his reaction. "You've still got it," Steven said softly. Loud enough for the mic to catch, Chuck smiled faintly. "It was never about losing it, Steven. It's about remembering where it comes from." The crowd applauded again, this time not for the punch, but for the moment of respect between 2 martial artists. The camera zoomed in on their handshake, 2 strong hands meeting in the middle of the mat. both acknowledging that the real victory was mutual respect. Then came the chants. Chuck. Chuck, Chuck. The arena exploded. People were on their feet, cheering, clapping, whistling. Even the commentators couldn't contain themselves. Ladies and gentlemen, that was a masterclass in control, respect, and discipline. Steven raised Chuck's hand into the air, signaling his acknowledgement in front of everyone. The cameras flashed like lightning. The photo of that moment would be on every news outlet the next morning. Within hours, the clip hit social media. The video was posted with the caption, "When arrogance meets mastery." The punch heard around the world. In just one night, it gained over 50 million views. Comment sections were flooded, with praise for Chuck's calm and Steven's humility afterward. That's not just a fight, that's a life lesson. Chuck Norris didn't just punch him, he enlightened him. If you ever doubt real martial arts, watch this moment. Clips played across news channels, sports shows, and podcasts. Analysts broke down Chuck's technique frame by frame, calling it the perfect counter, the embodiment of years of discipline in 1 second. Even Steven Seagal himself went online 2 days later and posted, "Respect to Chuck Norris." I laughed, but he taught me something real. The man's a legend. That message earned him unexpected praise. People appreciated that he admitted his mistake publicly. In an exclusive post-event interview, Chuck was asked what went through his mind right before the punch. He smiled and said, "Nothing." That's the point. When you let go of ego, everything flows naturally. The reporter laughed, saying, "So, no anger?" Chuck shook his head. "Why would I be angry? He was just looking for truth. I helped him find it." That line alone went viral again. Millions shared it across platforms with captions like "Wisdom of a True Master." In an exclusive post-event interview, Chuck was asked what went through his mind right before the punch. He smiled and said, "Nothing." That's the point. When you let go of ego, everything flows naturally. The reporter laughed, saying, "So, no anger?" Chuck shook his head. "Why would I be angry? He was just looking for truth. I helped him find it." That line alone went viral again. Millions shared it across platforms with captions like, "Wisdom of a True Master." The narrator's voice returns here with a direct address. If you were there that night, standing in that crowd, whose lesson would you carry home? Would you rather have Chuck's calm power or Steven's confidence before the fall? Tell me in the comments below, and let's see how many true warriors are watching this story right now. This line invites the audience emotionally, not just to comment, but to reflect a few days later. Chuck and Steven met again, this time not on the mat, but backstage at a charity event. Steven approached first, smiling genuinely. "You know, Chuck, I've been in hundreds of matches and no one ever taught me a lesson like that." Chuck placed a hand on his shoulder. "It wasn't a lesson for you, Steven. It was for everyone watching. To remind them that strength without respect isn't strength at all." Steven nodded. "Guess that's something I needed to hear." They laughed, shook hands again, and walked onto the stage together, two veterans side by side, united in purpose. The crowd gave them a standing. Reporters captured every second. The shot of Chuck and Steven walking together became one of the most iconic martial arts images of the decade. Over the following weeks, martial arts schools across the world used that viral clip as a teaching tool. Instructors told their students, "This is why control and discipline matter more than speed or strength." Hashtags flooded social media. Respect over ego, toward Chuck Norris lesson. A true martial artist, even non-fighters commented, saying how the story inspired them to stay humble in their own lives. The world didn't just see a punch, it saw wisdom in motion. Later, a journalist asked Chuck how it felt to go viral again after all these years. He smiled modestly. "I never tried to go viral. I just showed up and did what I always do and stayed true to the art." The reporter chuckled. "And what about Steven?" Chuck nodded. "He's a good man. We all fall into pride sometimes. But real strength is when you can rise again, wiser." The camera faded to black as the narrator delivered the closing line. The punch may have silenced a room, but its echo reminded the world. Respect hits harder than any fist. Days passed, but the moment refused to fade. Clips of Chuck Norris's calm counterpunch were everywhere, on phones, TVs, and timelines. It wasn't just a fight anymore. It had become a metaphor. People across the world were quoting his words. Power is easy to gain. Control takes a lifetime. That line appeared on gym walls, motivation posters, even in classrooms. But for Chuck, nothing had changed. While the internet turned him into a trending legend again, he was back to his simple routine, training early in the morning, spending time with family, and quietly teaching kids at his local dojo. Reporters tried to chase him down for interviews, but he politely declined most. Let the moment speak for itself, he'd say. It wasn't about me. It was about what people saw in that silence. Meanwhile, Steven Seagal also felt the weight of that encounter, not as shame, but as transformation. In a televised interview days later, he smiled humbly and said, "You know, when Chuck hit me, it wasn't pain I felt. It was perspective." He paused, laughed, and added, "For years I thought being the loudest meant being the strongest. Turns out real power doesn't need an audience." That single statement made headlines again. It wasn't mockery anymore. It was mutual respect. For the first time, fans saw two legends on the same page, not divided by ego but united by growth. Across the world, dojos replayed the clip as part of lessons. Instructors told students, "Watch how Chuck doesn't fight, he guides." That's martial arts. Young fighters admired Steven too, not for his defeat, but for how he faced it. News anchors called it the most respectful knockout in history. Podcasters described it as the moment martial arts returned to its roots. Even the UFC's official account tweeted, "Respect hits harder than power. Legends never stop teaching." The comment section was filled with people writing one simple word: respect. The narrator's voice deepened as slow, cinematic music played under a highlight reel of the moment. The stare, the silence, the punch. Chuck didn't win because he was stronger. He won because he understood something most people forget: that the greatest victories aren't over others, they're over yourself. A pause. If you believe the world needs more calm and chaos, more respect than rage, type respect in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe for more true stories of courage, humility, and the warriors who remind us power without purpose means nothing. The music swelled as clips of both men flashed side by side, Chuck training quietly, Steven teaching students with a softer smile. The screen faded into black and white, symbolizing peace after conflict. Weeks later, Chuck and Steven appeared together at a charity event supporting youth martial arts programs. Kids surrounded them, wide-eyed, holding posters that read, "Respect, discipline, honor." A young boy asked Chuck, "Sir, how did you stay so calm when he was yelling?" Chuck kneeled down, smiled, and said softly, "Because anger blinds you, but respect lets you see." Steven nodded beside him, adding, "And sometimes, getting hit is the best way to wake up." Everyone laughed warmly. The camera panned out, showing both men shaking hands once more, this time not in competition, but in unity. The clip ended with a quote written across the screen: "Legends aren't defined by how they fight, but by how they forgive." Then the narrator closed with the final line: "Calm, powerful, unforgettable." Steven Seagal laughed at Chuck Norris's karate skills. But the world will never forget the day laughter turned into silence, and silence turned into wisdom. The video faded to black. The music softened. The words appeared like comment, subscribe, and remember. Stay humble, stay strong, and always choose respect.